As a peace-loving global citizen. Being a friend to all. Chapter 1, Part 3. Once I set my mind to do something, I have to put it into action immediately. Otherwise, I cannot sleep. As a child, I would sometimes get an idea during the night but be forced to wait until morning before acting on it. I would stay awake and make scratches on the wall to pass the time. This happened so often that I would almost dig a hole in the wall, and chunks of dirt would pile up on the floor. I also couldn't sleep if I had been treated unfairly during the day. In such a case, I would get out of bed during the night, go to the culprit's home, and challenge him to come out and fight me. I am sure it must have been very difficult for my parents to raise me. I could not stand to see someone treated unjustly. Whenever there was a fight among the children in the village, I would involve myself as though I were responsible to see that justice was served in every situation. I would decide which child in the fight was in the wrong, and I would scold that child in a loud voice. Once I went to see the grandfather of a boy who was a bully in the neighborhood. I said to him, "Your grandson has done this and that wrong. Please take care of it." I could be wild in my actions, but nevertheless I was a child with a big heart. I would sometimes visit my married older sister in the home 13 of her husband's family, and demand that they serve me rice cakes and chicken. The adults never disliked me for this because they could see that my heart was filled with a warm love. I was particularly good at taking care of animals. When birds made a nest in a tree in front of our house, I dug a small waterhole for them to drink water. I also scattered some hulled millet from the storeroom on the ground for the birds to eat. At first, the birds would fly away whenever someone came close. They soon realized, however, that the person giving them food was someone who loved them, and they stopped flying away when I approached. Once I thought I would try raising fish. So I caught some fish and put them in the water hole. I also took a fistful of fish food and sprinkled it over the water. When I got up the next morning, though, I found that all the fish had died during the night. I was so looking forward to raising those fish. I stood there in astonishment, looking at them floating on top of the water. I remember that I cried all day that day. My father kept many bee colonies. He would take a large hive box and fasten a basic foundation to the bottom of the hive. Then the bees would deposit their beeswax there to create a nest and store their honey. I was a curious child, and I wanted to see just how the bees built the hive. So I stuck my face into the middle of the hive and got myself stung severely by the bees, causing my entire face to swell tremendously. I once took the foundations from the hive boxes and received a severe scolding from my father. Once the bees had finished building their hives, my father would take the foundations and stack them to one side. These foundations were covered with beeswax that could be used as fuel for lamps in place of oil. I took those expensive foundations, broke them up, and took them to homes that couldn't afford to buy oil for their lamps. It was an act of kindness, but I had done it without my father's permission, and so I was harshly reprimanded. When I was 12, we had very little in the way of games. The choices were a Parcheesi-like game called Yuta, a chess-like game called Jang-gi, and card games. I always enjoyed it when many people would play together. During the day, I would like to play Yuta or fly my kite, and in the evenings I would make the rounds of the card games going on around the village. They were games where the winner picked up 121 Korean monetary unit after each hand, and I could usually win at least once every 3 hands. New Year's Eve and the first full moon of the new year were the days when the most gambling went on. On those days, the police would look the other way and never arrest anyone for gambling. I went to where grown-ups were gambling, took a nap during the night, and got them to deal me in for just 3 hands in the early morning, just as they were about to call it quits for the night. I took the money I had won, bought some starch syrup, and took it around to all my friends to give them each a taste. I didn't use the money for myself or to do anything bad. When my older sister's husbands visited our home, I would ask permission and take money from their wallets. I would then use this money to buy sweets for children in need. I also bought them starch syrup. In any village it is natural that there are people who live well and those who don't. When I would see a child who had brought boiled millet to school for lunch, I couldn't eat my own better lunch of rice. So I would exchange my rice for his millet. I felt closer to the children from poor families than to those from rich families, and I wanted somehow to see to it that they didn't go hungry. This was a kind of game that I enjoyed most of all. I was still a child, but I felt that I wanted to be to everyone. In fact, I wanted to be more than just friends. I wanted to have relationships where we could share our deepest hearts. One of my uncles was a greedy man. His family owned a melon patch near the middle of the village, and every summer, when the melons were ripe and giving off a sweet fragrance, the village children would beg him to let them eat some. My uncle, though, set up a tent on the road next to the melon patch and sat there keeping guard, refusing to share even a single melon. One day I went to him and asked, "Uncle, would it be all right if sometime I were to go to your patch and eat all the melon I want?" Uncle willingly answered, "Sure, that would be fine." So I sent word to all the children that anyone wanting to eat melon should bring a burlap bag and gather in front of my house at midnight. At midnight I led them to my uncle's melon patch and told them, "I want all of you to pick a row of melons, and don't worry about anything." The children shouted with joy and ran into the melon patch. It took only a few minutes for several rows of melons to be picked clean. That night the hungry children of the village sat in a clover field and ate melons until their stomachs almost burst. The next day there was big trouble. I went to my uncle's home, and it was in pandemonium, like a beehive that had been poked. "You rascal," my uncle shouted at me. "Was this your doing? Are you the one who ruined my entire year's work of raising melons?" No matter what he said, I was not going to back down. "Uncle," I said, "don't you remember? You told me I could eat all the melons I wanted." The village children wanted to eat melons, and their desire was my desire. Was it right for me to give them a melon each, or should I absolutely not have given them any? When he heard this, my uncle said, "All right. You're right." That was the end of his anger. The end of Chapter 1, Part 3. Being a friend to all. As a peace-loving global citizen. A definite compass for my life. Chapter 1, Part 4. The Moon clan originated in Nam Pyong, near Naeju, Choya Province, a town about 320 miles south of Seoul, in the southwest region of the country. My great-great-grandfather, Sung Hak Moon, had 3 sons. The youngest of these was my great-grandfather, Myung Moon, who himself had 3 sons, Chi Guk, Shin Guk, and Yun Guk. My grandfather, Chi Guk Moon, was the oldest. Grandfather Chi Guk Moon was illiterate, as he did not attend either a modern elementary school or the traditional village school. His power of concentration was so great, however, that he was able to recite the full text of the Korean translation of Sanguoji just by having listened to others read it to him. And it wasn't just Sanguoji. When he heard someone tell an interesting story, he could memorize it and retell it in exactly the same words. He could memorize anything after hearing it just once. My father took after him in this way. He could sing from memory the Christian hymnal, consisting of more than 400 pages. Grandfather followed the last words of his father to live his life with a spirit of giving, but he was not able to maintain the family fortune. This was because his youngest brother, my great-uncle Yun Guk Moon, borrowed money against the family's property and lost it all. Following this incident, members of the family went through some very hard times, but my grandfather and father never spoke ill of great-uncle Yun Guk. This was because they knew he had not lost the money gambling or doing anything of that nature. Instead, he had sent the money to the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea, based in Shanghai, China. In those days, 70,000 won was a large sum, and this was the amount that my great-uncle donated to the independence movement. Great-uncle Yun Guk, a graduate of Pyongyang Seminary and a minister, was an intellectual who was fluent in English and well-versed in Chinese studies. He served as the responsible pastor for 3 churches, including Diak Hung Church in Diak Myung. He participated in the drafting of the 1919 Declaration of Independence, together with Nam Seon Cho. When it was found, however, that 3 of the 16 Christian leaders among the signatories were associated with Diak Hung Church, great-uncle had his name removed from the list. Sung Hoon Lee, one of the remaining signatories who worked with my great-uncle in establishing the Osan School, asked great-uncle Yoon Guk to take care of all his affairs in case the independence movement failed and he died at the hands of the Japanese colonial authorities. On returning to our hometown, great-uncle Yoon Guk printed tens of thousands of Korean flags, and handed them out to the people, who poured into the streets to shout their support for Korean independence. He was arrested on March 8 as he led a demonstration on the hill behind the Ipomyeon administrative office. The demonstration in support of independence was attended by the principal, faculty, and some 2,000 students of the Osan School, some 3,000 Christians, and some 4,000 other residents of the area. He was given a 2-year prison sentence and was imprisoned in the Uiju prison. The following year he was released as part of a special pardon. Even after his release, severe persecution by the Japanese police meant he could never stay long in one place, and he was always on the run. He carried a large scar where the Japanese police had tortured him by stabbing him with a bamboo spear and carving out a piece of his flesh. He was speared in the legs and in the side of his ribs, but he said that he never gave in. When the Japanese found they couldn't break him, they offered him the position of county chief if he would pledge to stop participating in the independence movement. His response was to rebuke the Japanese in a loud voice, "Do you think I would take on a position and work for you thieves?" When I was about 7 or 8 years old, great-uncle Yoon Guk was staying in our home for a short time, and some members of the Korean Independence Army came to see him. They were low on funds and had traveled by night on foot, through a heavy snowfall to reach our house. My father covered the heads of us children with a sleeping quilt so that we would not be awakened. I was already wide awake, and I lay there under the quilt, my eyes wide open, listening as best I could to the sounds of the adults talking. Though it was late, my mother killed a chicken and boiled some noodles to serve to the independence fighters. To this day, I cannot forget the words that I heard great-uncle Yoon Guk speak as I lay there under the quilt, holding my breath in excitement. "Even if you die," he said, "if you die for the sake of our country, you will be blessed." He continued, "Right now, we can see only darkness before us, but the bright morning is sure to come." Because of the effects of torture, he did not have full use of his body, but his voice resonated with strength. I also remember thinking to myself then, why did such a wonderful person as great-uncle have to go to prison? If only we were stronger than Japan, this wouldn't have happened. Great-uncle Yoon Guk continued to roam about the country, avoiding persecution by the Japanese police, and it was not until 1966, while I was in Seoul, that I received news of him again. Great-uncle appeared in a dream to one of my younger cousins and told him, "I am buried in Jungsun, Gangwon Province." We went to the address he gave in the dream and found that he had passed away 9 years before that. We found only a grave mound covered with weeds. I had his remains reburied in Paju, Gyeonggi Province, near Seoul. In the years following Korea's liberation from Japan in 1945, communists in North Korea killed Christian ministers and independence fighters indiscriminately. Great-uncle Yoon Guk, fearing his presence might cause harm to the family, escaped the communists by crossing south over the 38th parallel and settling in Jungsun. No one in our family was aware of this. He supported himself in that remote mountain valley by selling calligraphy brushes. Later, we were told that he set up a traditional village school where he taught Chinese classics. According to some of his former students, he often enjoyed spontaneously composing poems in Chinese characters. His students transcribed and preserved some 130 of these, including the following. South-North Peace. 10 years have passed since I left home to come south. The flow of time speeds my hair to turn white. I would return north, but how can I? What was intended as a short sojourn has been prolonged. Wearing the long-sleeved co-hemp clothing of summer, I fan myself with a silk fan and consider what the autumn will bring. Peace between South and North draws near. Children waiting under the eaves, you needn't worry so much. Though separated from his family and living in Jungsun, a land unfamiliar to him in every way, Great-uncle Yoon Guk's heart was filled with concerns for his country. Great-uncle also left this poetic verse: when setting your goal in the beginning, pledge yourself to a high standard, don't allow yourself even the least bit of private desire. My great-uncle's contributions to the independence movement were posthumously recognized by the Republic of Korea government in 1977 with a presidential award and in 1990 with the Order of Merit for National Foundation. Even now, I sometimes recite his poetic verses. They are infused with his steadfast love for his country, even in the face of extreme adversity. Recently, as I have grown older, I think about Great-uncle Yoon Guk more often. Each phrase of his poetry expressing his heart of concern for his country penetrates into my heart. I have taught our members the song Dien Yiri Ga, Song of Korean Geography, whose words were written by Great-uncle Yoon Guk himself. I enjoy singing this song with our members. When I sing this song, from Mount Baekdu to Mount Halla, I feel relieved of my burdens. Song of Korean Geography. The peninsula of Korea in the east. Positioned among three countries. North, the wide plains of Manchuria. East, the deep and blue East Sea. South, a sea of many islands. West, the deep Yellow Sea. Food in the seas on three sides, our treasure of all species of fish. Mighty Mount Baekdu stands on the north, providing water to the rivers of Amrock and Tumen. Flowing into seas east and west, marking a clear border with the Soviets. Mount Kumgang shines bright in the center. A preserve for the world, pride of Korea. Mount Halla rises above the blue South Sea. A landmark for fishermen at sea. Four plains of Dedong, Hongong, Gyeomgong, and Jeonju. Give our people food and clothing. Four mines of Wonsan, Sunan, Gacheon, and Yeryong. Give us the treasures of the earth. Four cities of Gyeongsang, Pyongyang, Daegu, and Kaesong shine over the land. Four ports of Busan, Wonsan, Mokpo, and Incheon. Welcome foreign ships. Railroads spread out from Gyeongsang, connecting the two main lines, Gyeongyui and Gyeongbu. Branch lines Gyeongwon and Honam run north and south, cover the peninsula. Our sites tell us our history. Pyongyang, 2,000-year-old city of Dangun, Kaesong, capital of Koryo, Gyeongsang, 500-year capital of Chosun. Gyeongju, 2,000 years of Shiloh's culture shines, origin of Pak Hyuk Ko Sai, Chungcheong has Buyo, the historic capital of Peach. Sons of Korea pioneering the future, the waves of civilization wash against our shores. Come out of the hills, and march forward in strength to the world of the future. The end of Chapter 1, Part 4. A definite compass for my life. As a peace-loving global citizen. Stubborn child who never gives up. Chapter 1, Part 5. My father was not good at collecting debts, but if he borrowed money, he would honor the pledge to repay, even if it meant selling the family cow or even removing one of the pillars from our home and selling it at market. He always said, "You can't change the truth with trickery. Anything that is true will not be dominated by a small trick. Anything that is the result of trickery won't go more than a few years before it is exposed." My father had a large stature. He was so strong that he had no difficulty walking up a flight of stairs carrying a bag of rice on his shoulders. The fact that at age 90 I'm still able to travel around the world and carry on my work is a result of the physical strength I inherited from my father. My mother, whose favorite Christian hymn was Higher Ground, was also quite a strong woman. I take after her not only for her wide forehead and round face but for her straightforward and high-spirited personality as well. I have a stubborn streak, and there is no doubt I am my mother's child. When I was a child, I had the nickname Day Crier. I earned this nickname because once I started to cry, I wouldn't stop for the entire day. When I cried, it would be so loud that people would think something terrible had happened. People sleeping in bed would come outside to see what was going on. Also, I didn't just cry sitting still. I would jump around the room, injuring myself and creating an uproar. Sometimes I would bleed. I had this kind of intense personality even when I was young. Once my mind was made up, I would never back down, not even if it meant breaking a bone in my body. Of course, this was all before I became mature. When my mother would scold me for doing something wrong, I would talk back to her, saying, "No. Absolutely not." All I had to do was admit that I was wrong, but I would rather have died than let those words out of my mouth. My mother, though, had quite a strong personality as well. She would strike me, and say, "You think you can get away with not answering your parent?" Once, she struck me so hard she knocked me down. Even after I got up, I wouldn't give in to her. She just stood in front of me, crying loudly. Even then, I wouldn't admit that I was wrong. My competitive spirit was as strong as my stubbornness. I couldn't stand to lose in any situation. The adults in the village would say, "Osan's little tiny eyes, once he decides to do something, he does it." I don't remember how old I was when this happened. A boy gave me a bloody nose and ran away. For a month after that, I would go to his house every day and stand there, waiting for him to come out. The village adults were amazed to see me persist until finally his parents apologized to me. They even gave me a container full of rice cakes. This doesn't mean I was always trying to win with stubborn persistence. I was physically much larger and stronger than other children my age. No child could beat me in arm wrestling. I once lost a wrestling match to a boy 3 years older than I was, and it made me so angry that I couldn't sit still. I went to a nearby mountain, stripped some bark from an acacia tree, and for the next 6 months I worked out on this tree every evening to become strong enough to defeat that child. At the end of 6 months, I challenged him to a rematch and managed to beat him. Each generation in our family has had many children. I had one older brother, 3 older sisters, and 3 younger sisters. I actually had 4 other younger siblings who were born after Hyo-seon. Mother gave birth to 13 children, but 5 did not survive. Her heart must have been deeply tormented. Mother suffered a great deal to raise so many children in circumstances that were by no means plentiful. As a child I had many siblings. If these siblings got together with our first and second cousins, we could do anything. Much time has passed, however, and now I feel as though I am the only one remaining in the world. I once visited North Korea for a short while, in 1991. I went to my hometown for the first time in 48 years and found that my mother and most of my siblings had passed away. Only one older sister and one younger sister remained. My older sister, who had been like a mother to me when I was a child, had become a grandmother of more than 70 years. My younger sister was older than 60, and her face was covered with wrinkles. When we were young, I teased my younger sister a lot. I would shout, "Hey, Hyo-seon, you're going to marry a guy with one eye." And she would come back with, "What did you say? What makes you think you know that, brother?" Then she would run up behind me and tap me on the back with her tiny fists. In the year she turned 18, Hyo-seon met a man with whom one of our aunts was trying to arrange her marriage. That morning she got up early, carefully combed her hair, and powdered her face. She thoroughly cleaned our home inside and out and waited for her prospective groom to arrive. "Hyo-seon," I teased her, "you must really want to get married." This made her blush, and I still remember how beautiful she looked with the redness in her face showing through the white powder. It has been well over 10 years since my visit to North Korea. My older sister, who wept so sorrowfully to see me, has since passed away, leaving just my younger sister. It fills me with such anguish. I feel as though my heart may melt away. I was good with my hands, and I used to make clothes for myself. When it got cold, I would quickly knit myself a cap to wear. I was better at it than the women were, and I would give knitting tips to my older sisters. I once knitted a muffler for Hyo Seon. My hands were as big and thick as a bear's paw, but I enjoyed needlework, and I would even make my own underwear. I would take some cloth off a roll, fold it in half, cut it to the right design, hem it, sew it up, and put it on. When I made a pair of traditional Korean socks for my mother this way, she expressed how much she liked them by saying, well, I thought second son was just fooling around, but these fit me perfectly. In those days it was necessary to weave cotton cloth as a part of preparations for the marriage of a son or daughter. Mother would take cotton wool and place it on a spinning wheel to make the thread. This was called tagang in the dialect of Pyongan province. She would set the width at 20 threads and make 12 pieces of cotton cloth, 13 pieces of cotton cloth, and so on. Each time a child would marry, cotton cloth as soft and beautiful as processed satin would be created through mother's coarse hands. Her hands were incredibly quick. Others might weave 3 or 4 pieces of tagang fabric in a day, but mother could weave as many as 20. When she was in a hurry to complete the marriage preparations for one of my older sisters, she could weave an entire roll of fabric in a day. Mother had an impatient personality. Whenever she would set her mind to doing something, she would work quickly to get it done. I take after her in that way. Since childhood, I have always enjoyed eating a wide variety of foods. As a child, I enjoyed eating corn, raw cucumber, raw potato, and raw beans. On a visit to my maternal relatives who lived about 5 miles away from our home, I noticed something round growing in the field. I asked what it was and was told it was jigua, or earth fruit. In that neighborhood, people referred to sweet potatoes as earth fruit. Someone dug one up and cooked it for me in steam, so I ate it. It had such a delectable taste that I took a whole basket full of them and ate them all myself. From the following year, I couldn't keep myself away from my maternal relatives' home for more than 3 days. I would shout out, "Mother, I'm going out for a while," run the whole distance to where they lived, and eat sweet potatoes. Where we lived, we had what we called potato pass in May. We would survive the winter on potatoes, until spring came and we could start harvesting barley. May was a critical period, because if our store of potatoes was depleted before the barley could be harvested, people began to starve. Surviving the time when potato stores were running low and the barley had not yet been harvested was similar to climbing to a steep mountain pass, so we called it potato pass. The barley we ate then was not the tasty, flat-grained barley that we see today. The grains were more cylindrical in shape, but that was all right with us. We would soak the barley in water for about 2 days before cooking it. When we sat down to eat, I would press down on the barley with my spoon, trying to make it stick together. It was no use, though, because when I scooped it up in my spoon, it would just scatter like so much sand. I would mix it with gochujang, red pepper paste, and take a mouthful. As I chewed, the grains of barley would keep coming out between my teeth, so I had to keep my mouth tightly closed. We also used to catch and eat tree frogs. In those days in rural areas, children would be fed tree frogs when they caught the measles and their faces became thin from the weight loss. We would catch 3 or 4 of these frogs that were big and had plenty of flesh on their fat legs. We would roast them wrapped in squash leaves, and they would be very tender and tasty, just as though they had been steamed in a rice cooker. Speaking of tasty, I can't leave out sparrow and pheasant meat, either. We would cook the lovely colored eggs of mountain birds and the waterfowl that would fly over the fields making a loud, gulping call. As I roamed the hills and fields, this is how I came to understand that there was an abundance of food in the natural environment given to us by God. The end of Chapter 1, Part 5. Stubborn child who never gives up.